Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Sterling Moss of having a DOS, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you post UFC 274, I believe. 274, yeah. Oliveira versus Gaethje, and assorted garbage. this was a rough one, fellas. And I wasn't paying $80 for it like a lot of Americans are having to. This was very strange. And this was one of those ones where you could look at it beforehand and we said last week, a lot of old man fights on this one. You could draw a line through the middle of that Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson matchup, and then everything below it on the card was like Ovin Prue, Shogun Rua, Donald Cerrone, Joe Lozon, people who should be retired, basically. But then Donald Cerrone pulled out of his fight, and that was actually a massive disappointment because this card suffered massively from it. But even looking at it beforehand, you could go like, Mauricio Shogun Rua versus Ovin Prue. Why is that on the paid portion of the card? Why is the paid portion of the card treated like the same as the undercard? I don't understand that. Why, I get that they want to have a strong prelim headliner or whatever it is they call it, but then when you drop back down to just garbage for the first part of the paid card, it makes no sense. Like, the whole paid card should be banger matches, because you're asking $80 fucking for it. But we will get into slagging off fights, and boy, do I have a lot to say about that fight where not a lot happened in the co-main event. But first, let's appreciate the good shit. The lightweights, they delivered. They almost always do. It's lightweight and bantamweight. If you made every card lightweight and bantamweight, there wouldn't be any bad fights. But Charles Oliveira, the king, versus Justin Gaethje. Now, see, I've been Church of Gaethje head pastor for years and years, but I've also been Charles Oliveira is my top boy for years and years, and this was a real, straight down the middle, heart split in two. Anticipation, but also fear. And it was all made worse by just a disastrous day of weigh-ins. Most of the time, weigh-ins are the most boring shit in the world. I do not understand people who get hyped to watch weigh-in videos or get hyped to watch them do a stare down or whatever. But then sometimes you skip them and like weird shit happens. And to be fair, like none of this ever happens at the ceremonial weigh-in. Nowadays it's all beforehand. But Charles Oliveira missed weight. No two ways about that. Well, I mean, there was a lot of like conspiracy theorizing, and the UFC have now announced that they're going to have a bodyguard for the scale at future events. And Dana was saying that like the European fighters switched it to kilos, and that fucked with it or something, or might have fucked with it. I mean, either way, it doesn't really matter what the hotel scale says. You're getting weighed on the Athletic Commission scale, and that's all that matters. Now, if you want to get upset about people leaning on the towel on the real scale, I'm all for that. Or some weirdo brought up Khabib in connection to the Oliveira missing weight thing. Like, Khabib's legacy remains intact. And it was such a weird call because Khabib has had horrible trouble cutting weight in the past. He got hospitalized trying to cut weight for one of the several cursed Tony Ferguson matchups. And then, of course, most recently in Abu Dhabi, there was that one where when you're moving the scale, you do it until the scale tips, hence the expression tipping the scale. But this guy doing it just shot it up and went, yeah, that's 155. Yeah, why not? And at the time, everyone was like, bit sus, but, it's Abu Dhabi. There isn't a real commission there. But then this was Arizona, so I mean, every commission except the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the California State Athletic Commission, and the New York State Athletic Commission is pretty much garbage. And those are bad, those three commissions, but you hear about them because they do a lot of shit. There's a lot of fights held there and they do a lot of shit. Whereas you don't hear about like the Texas Commission because the Texas Commission is like, yeah, do whatever you want. Just pay us $50 per fighter for the privilege. What's that, Strikeforce? Your fighters want to use oxygen tanks between rounds while there's no rule against it. Actually, someone brought up, it was on the Reddit discussion thread, someone brought up, like, can you theoretically cut blood? And I went, well, do I have a story for you? Cody McKenzie took 1.5 pints of blood to make weight. Took it the last minute too. He was going to miss weight. He took 1.5 pints of blood. And that, apparently 1.5 pints of blood will get you 1.5 pounds of weight. Oh no, I think it was just a pint of blood, but it was 1.5 pounds of weight, which is a crazy amount. But, and looking at the articles at the time, it happened in like Battlegrounds FC. It was after he left the UFC. It was some like rinky-tink promotion out in bumfuck nowhere. But MMA fighting, in this story where they reported it, they then asked the commissioner, like the head of commission. And the head of the commission is always just some dickhead who knows the governor. That's how you get that job, like Keith Kaiser or whoever our new knobhead is. They always have alliterative names too. It's like they want to be superheroes. But this dickhead commissioner just goes, well, there's no rule against it. More power to him. And if there isn't a rule against it, there probably should be, because the entire thing that we don't like about weight cutting is that it dehydrates you, and the brain seems to react worse to punishment, physical trauma, when you are dehydrated. If you get as dehydrated as you can by sweating and then you take blood in addition to that, seems like that's got to be terrible. If you're fighting like slightly anemic. Or maybe you keep the blood and you take it out and you put it back in. But isn't that in effect blood doping? Oh, and of course, yeah, intravenous, there were bans on intravenous bags, so I imagine there's bans on intravenous paraphernalia being used. But yeah, so someone was like, could Charles cut blood? No. I mean, he could have got 1.5 pounds off with a pint of blood, but the man missed weight. He had another chance to lose the weight, and he didn't lose it. And they stripped him of his title, which is sad because it's the first time that it's happened, which is very surprising. We got close because Figueiredo missed weight in a fight for the vacant title against Benavidez, and he won it, so they had to rerun it. I'm a poet, and I didn't know it. But there's no two ways about it. You've got to make the weight. And, of course, everyone's saying, like, it's only 0.5 pound. It's 0.5 pound of absolutely dried out prune muscle. He's lean. He's completely dehydrated. The moment that he hydrates up again, that 0.5 pound is going to be like 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, And, of course, this brought up the whole thing that everyone just fucking hates weight cutting, and so do I, but it's always going to be part. It's always going to be part, because people will always try and game it as much as they possibly can. These people wouldn't pay money to like George Lockhart and Mike Dolce if they didn't think that they really needed to cut the weight. It's like when Makhachev was calling out RDA. Well, I think probably Ali Abdulaziz was calling out RDA before that fight where, who was it dropped out? But they had a dropout, and Makhachev had fought like last weekend, and RDA was now opponentless this weekend. And Ali was all over Islam's Twitter pretending he wanted the fight. And then clearly at some point when it started moving forward and people were like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, they must have called Islam Makhachev and he would have said, no, I'm nowhere near on weight. I just fought last weekend and now I've eaten a meal, so now I'm definitely nowhere near weight. These guys are getting dehydrated to within an inch of their life. They're not going to be able to do it on like a couple of days' notice. I think Makhachev would smash RDA, but it's so funny. They'd been calling for that matchup forever. They've been trying to put it together forever. And then they're like, we could do it now. And he's like, forget about that. Let's move on. I want a title shot. But on the subject of title shots, I think it's him or Dariush next. They're talking about doing Conor McGregor. People were immediately on the conspiracy bandwagon of this was a way to get the belt off Oliveira and have McGregor fight for a vacant title or whatever. But I can't see it, to be honest. But if he wants to fight McGregor, that'd be great. Because it would not only be a huge money matchup for him, a largely pointless and huge money matchup for him, but it would also be completing the speed run of Khabib's top opponents. Now, I actually don't give a shit about like how fast you finish someone or whatever, but a lot of people do. And then now they've switched from like, easily finished Gaethje, Poirier, and... easily finished Gaethje and Poirier to never dropped around, never got hurt. Nobody gives a shit. Charles is out here doing it more interestingly. But I imagine there's going to be a lot of that coming up with the obvious showdown between him and Makhachev shaping up. What'd be really nice if he beats Makhachev and then Khabib does the comeback. That'd be a huge money fight for everyone involved. And also you'd have real greatest lightweight of all time title on it, basically. If you didn't see DC's list of greatest lightweights of all time this week, it was Khabib, BJ Penn, someone else, Conor McGregor, Frankie Edgar. You're like, poor old Frankie, actually one of the best lightweights of all time, gets pipped to the post by a guy who won one fight at lightweight ever. Thanks, DC. Anyway, on to this fight. Basically, everything we talked about on the Boycast preview came up, except for Oliveira trying to pursue a takedown. I did say that'd be quite an interesting area because Gaethje stops the takedown well, but it takes him, it does take energy out of him. So Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez both hit reactive doubles on him in the middle of their fights, and he exploded up to his feet off these takedown attempts. He used like elevators or butterflies against, I think it was Poirier, exploded back up to his feet and was immediately completely bollocksed. He's like puffing for air. So it was going to be interesting to see if Charles could get him on the fence and grind him, but it didn't really factor in his game plan. His game plan was to enter relatively safely behind a front kick or a raised knee or whatever, score the right hand when he could, and then immediately move to the collar tie or the double collar tie, which is cool because he's the last remaining shoot box great. Everyone else has left, including all the coaches that made it famous for what it was famous for, but he still loves the double collar tie. You can watch him in any fight he has. He uses the counter left hook to pull people into the collar tie, and then he'll hit him with knees to the body, elbows to the head, uppercuts, and that's what he was doing here. And getting the collar tie allowed him to then snap Gaethje's head down, because he's it was an interesting use of height rather than reach. Height is an interesting advantage because really it makes the opponent punch a couple of inches higher, which takes a little bit off their reach. Your arm straight out, your shoulder reaches further than if you start reaching upwards and forward, or even downwards and forwards. Punching down can be quite disadvantageous to a fighter too. But a height advantage tends to make you slower on the level change, as in getting in low on a shot or ducking under punches, but does mean you can get over the top of people. I mean, Tyson Fury does it all the time, but that's a lot more valuable when you can snap up a guillotine choke at any time. And Charles is obviously famous for the guillotine, but another guy who's great at this is Brian Ortega. Very tall for his weight class, enters clinches, dog shit takedowns, but pretty good at like hitting people with a knee or whatever. And then the moment that they're going ooh or defending themselves or trying to push off him, he snaps their head down. Guys do tend to like leave clinches with their arse out too, so that their head's forward, and that's a great time to snap them down. So that's what you saw in this fight, just tons of entering, grabbing the head, pulling it down, and Gaethje would like try and weave his head out. He'd get hit with an uppercut or knee or whatever, and he'd have to like muscle his way out of the clinch and run out the side. And Charles was hitting him with right hands as he came out the side too, as he circled off, which is something he was doing to Kevin Lee. If you watch that fight, he grabs the collar tie. Kevin Lee does a little U with his head. He weaves underneath the elbow and comes up. And as he comes up, Charles just shoots the straight right across at him. By being really handsy and grabbing the head in every exchange, you make the other guy like push off you. And when he's pushing off you, he's not in position to defend punches or throw punches back. Oh, I should probably plug, I did an article about this last night. I was so excited by this, the Trinaldo fight, and a couple of others on this card that I wrote a post-fight breakdown, which is something I haven't done in quite a while, given that that's how I basically built my name. But yeah, if you're a Patreon boy, go check that out. Lots of diagrams, lots of doodling lines on them telling you what to look at and what's going on. And obviously a lot more eloquent than me talking like this. If you like me swearing, podcast. If you like actual well-written shit, check out the article. But what we talked about last time and what we talked about in this post-fight article as well, and what I'm going to talk about now, is that the matchup was always... I mean, the thing with Oliveira is always, he's going to go forward, he's going to overwhelm you with variety and pace, but at that same time, he's putting himself in tremendous danger. And in this fight, it was even more so because he's dealing with the biggest counterpuncher in the division. And so he got dinged by Gaethje, got dinged by Chandler, obviously, back in the original title fight. But in this one, it didn't seem as bad as those previous two. He basically sat down himself and pointed his feet at Gaethje. And I mean, that's the purpose of the guard. The guard is to have your feet and knees in front of the guy so that it's harder for him to get to you and hit you in the head. And Gaethje went, rightly, no, get up. And that was long enough for Oliveira to avoid like a punishing follow-up exchange. You so often see, and we talked about it quite a lot in recent weeks. What was I talking about? The Topuria Jai Herbert fight is a great example. Jai Herbert gets the punch everyone focuses on is the one that knocked him like off his feet in the exchange. But just before that, the exchange before, he'd eaten a right hand across the top and he started acting weird off that. It tends to be you get hit with one, your behavior changes, and then you get into an exchange that you probably shouldn't, and you get put out easier by a shot you didn't see coming. A lot of taking punches is to do with alertness and awareness. And we talk about that a lot. We talked about it last week with like rhythm and extending combinations longer than expected. But by dropping to the mat as soon as he got dinged, he managed to avoid that horrible situation where if the guy just comes in on you, you go, oh, better punch to keep him off me, and you get hit and you go down far easier than you otherwise would have. But what was getting him in trouble was the thing that we said would get him in trouble. Very upright stance, very high head, like very pretty punching form because he's so upright. But it means that he very rarely ducks down behind his shoulders and protects himself. It's all very head up in the air, which makes you a sucker for the overhand. Can make you. He loves the left hook himself, so that will also put you in danger of being left hooked constantly. So it was Gaethje's overhand right and left hook that were giving him trouble. But he was shooting his right straight, both inside of Gaethje's left hook and inside of Gaethje's overhand as well. And he was really the very first one he threw hurt Gaethje. It was very impressive. And with Gaethje here, you saw exactly the same thing that happened against Khabib. Obviously, very different fighters, very different fights. But again, it was the pace and really, for a guy who was famous for setting a blistering pace himself and getting those finishes early in his career by just wearing people down and putting them in fights where they couldn't think and breathe and get space to work. Gaethje himself hates being put under pressure. I think this fight was basically what Tony Ferguson could have done if he got going. Obviously, what happened with Tony Ferguson was that it was definitely his first time meeting a really dangerous counterpuncher. And Gaethje was looking sharp as hell at that time too. But it got to a point where Tony wouldn't open up because he was going to get hit back on the return, and his punches weren't doing anything, or he wasn't getting close enough to do anything. So everything Tony did was either very obviously fake and from miles away, or very obviously committed and easy to counter. The more you are worried about the counters coming back, the bigger the gap becomes between your feints and your real strikes. And it just makes you easier and easier to read, which makes you more and more reluctant to actually attack for real. So Tony got stuck in this thing where he was barely doing anything. Whereas Charles here, while he did get dinged with counterpunches and hurt, he was able to drive the pace up and make Gaethje work. And Gaethje was exactly like in the Khabib fight. He's throwing these left hooks and throwing himself off balance, turning his back. He threw himself to his knees at one point in this fight, trying to throw a left hook, and Charles just wasn't there. And very quickly, it was the straight hitting, and obviously the teeps to the body, you can never undervalue those, and the knees to the body. There was a lot of body work in a short space of time in this fight. And there was a really nice one. I put a few stills of it in the post-fight article, but very early on, Charles is walking him down. And Charles as Charles is coming in, Gaethje slips to the inside and gets ready to throw the massive overhand. He throws his weight forward, and Charles stops and steps back. So Gaethje weaves his head back again, like he's doing. He slipped one way, so he's slipping back the other way to get back on his stance. And as he does it, Charles digs the teep into his body. If you can get a guy moving his head and kick him in the body, great shout. Oh, Johnny Hendricks versus Robbie Lawler 1 is a great example. Get the guy moving his head. He will spread his feet so that he can move his head from side to side. And that's when you kick him in the leg, because his legs are planted. His feet are planted. So I saw Diego Lima talking about the game plan for Charles in this one. And apparently it was straight hitting, backing him up and so on. But something he didn't mention, which I think was my big takeaway from this fight, was really watching his P's and Q's with the left hook. He still threw it from time to time, but it's been the Charles Oliveira staple, and he was being very cautious about when he threw it. And when he did throw it, he tended to get clipped too. He only really started throwing it once Gaethje was sort of in survival mode rather than here's my counters mode. And what Charles does a lot of the time is that he will lift his lead leg up as if to teep or just to check a kick, and then he will put it down in front of him. So he'll make some distance. He'll float in behind the lead leg. And as he comes down, he'll turn his foot in and throw the left hook. And it's a great way to... Well, firstly, if you pivot on your lead leg when you're throwing a left hook, you are very susceptible to the right low kick as a counter because you're turning your own knee in, which if you get kicked in that position, very nasty. Which is why a lot of kickboxers, especially Dutch kickboxers, don't pivot on the foot when they lead hook. But by combining it with that floating knee, which we talked about Volkanovski using all the time the other day, the moment that he thinks someone trying to counter kick him, slide back and kick him in the leg when he steps forward, like he does all the time to other people, the moment he thinks someone's going to do that to him, he picks his lead leg up and just floats in like he's... it's called a fake teep, or in point fighting it's called a Toby Comey, leaping in. But the purpose is, sometimes you're faking a teep, other times it's just to have the leg up as you drift in, because it makes it a lot harder to kick the leg as it's coming in. But by lifting the leg up and then dropping down, you take yourself away from the threat of the low kick, and then you put yourself in the position of a pivoted left hook. So it's a really nice technique that I think a lot of people should be looking at and trying to copy. Because I saw a lot of people on this card were checking low kicks much better than usual. They were hinging at the knee rather than picking the shin up and trying to expose it to the opponent. They were hinging at the knee and just withdrawing the lower leg from the kick, which is what you want to be doing. But then I was watching people like Randy Brown trying to lunge in with a right elbow afterwards, just coming nowhere close. Oliveira is very good at coming in off kicks, and it doesn't matter if it's a thigh kick or a low kick. He just floats in. But all of that was to say that where he normally does that, in this fight, he was doing a lot more pick the leg up, come in as if to left hook, but his hand just went straight to the head. He wasn't trying to hit him. He was trying to grab the head. And a lot of the time in his career, he normally lands the left hook and then pulls them in, but he was so focused on just watching his P's and Q's, keeping his guard up, grabbing the head, and then kneeing or elbowing or uppercutting or whatever. And he did a really good job with that. The amount that... I think a lot of people underrate how much it takes out of you, having your neck harassed the entire time. I mean, that's how Tyson Fury basically exhausted Deontay Wilder in their second and third fight. He just leaned on him. And even with Kenny Bayless as the referee, managed to do enough to just completely wreck Deontay Wilder. Very, very tiring. So he tired Gaethje out quite early, and then he hit him with a good right straight, put him down. He immediately ran to his back and started attacking a back triangle, very Gordon Ryan-esque. If you ever see someone put on a triangle from the back, they have the opponent's arm like up in the center of their chest. So it's like the opponent is punching the air, like they've succeeded. You know, the Tiger Woods air punch. Gordon Ryan has been murking people with that lately. Ethan Crelinsten is pretty good with it too. But he was looking to do that, and then he lost it, and Gaethje started scrambling out, and he used that scramble to retake the back in better position, because the reason he went for the triangle was that one of his legs was over Gaethje's arm, so he was going to slip off anyway. And then as Gaethje was getting up from the triangle attempt, he ran around, grabbed his back properly, sunk the choke. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Gaethje being a white belt in BJJ or whatever, but yeah, he's had some trouble there. Actually, one of the things that I meant to mention there, which I did mention in the article, Gaethje tends, like, he loves head blocking shots as well. As in, like, if you want to duck in on his legs and try and take him down, he will put his head down in front of yours. So it means that he also like headbutts people a lot. So if you watch the Michael Johnson fight, Michael Johnson tries to take him down at one point and he gets nutted for it. But that's all putting your own head down. Gaethje drops his head a lot anyway, which really plays into Charles Oliveira trying to pull him down, snap him into the armpit, hit him with knees from the collar tie. But yeah, really good fight, really delivered. Sad that we got this weird sort of vacant situation with Charles now, because he goes out to Dana and he's like, give me my belt back. And Dana's like, you didn't make weight, but you can fight for it. You're fighting for the vacant title. Which is, you know, it's kind of daft, because the belt is the belt. The belt's made up. It's by the UFC. If we're doing rankings of the best lightweight in the world, the best lightweight in the world right now is inarguably, on accomplishment, Charles Oliveira. Now you could speculate about skill and say Islam Makhachev's looking very good right now. But if you're doing accomplishment, it's Oliveira hands down. Every individual ranking in every major MMA website will agree with that, which would make him the champion of the world. So, you know, it's kind of daft, but it's very interesting getting into this, because there are the commission rules and there are the UFC rules, and they aren't the same. And the title is to do with the UFC, and the weigh-ins are to do with the commission. The commission would sanction a 5-round fight at 156. Like, it doesn't... It's not them saying the title isn't on it. It's the UFC. But rules is rules. They've got them. I mean, the thing that really did make me think about this one was the whole way pay-per-view points are done. And it is very well hidden. It's like all of the UFC's financial stuff. You know, they hide it so that they don't have to talk about it, because it would make them look bad, and everyone constantly going, oh yeah, look, they only actually pay them 12% of the revenue split, even though they claimed that it's going up to like 17. But also because idiots online, when they see bad shit about the UFC, will still go, I'm going to need some more information here before I judge the UFC. I've seen so many people reply to UFC shit with that. And you're like, they're not giving you more information. They could give you more information, but they won't. They had to be forced to show the revenue split originally by a lawsuit. And that was the revenue split from 10, 15 years ago. But anyway, there's this thing about pay-per-view points. They allege that like all the champions get them. So as soon as you're a champion, you get pay-per-view points, which is a percentage of pay-per-views sold. The bollocks part of that is that if you are a headliner on a pay-per-view, you are selling the tickets. You should be getting a cut of the pay-per-view. Because the UFC is supposed to be the promoter. But when they have Demetrius Johnson and he's not doing great, it's, oh, well, he's not very good at promoting himself. Like, your job title is promoter, mate. How are you still fucking this up? So if we are to believe that it's DJ's fault and it's on the fighters, then everyone who headlines, whether they're the champion or the challenger or it's not a title fight, should get a cut of the pay-per-view. And luckily, after all this, it turns out that Charles Oliveira did get his pay-per-view points. But it's a very sketchy situation because Figueiredo, when he was champion, did have a fight where he claimed he didn't get pay-per-view points. I mean, Gaethje probably didn't get pay-per-view points, but he should have. But if they stripped him and they didn't pay him pay-per-view points, they would have just increased their revenue percentage on that single pay-per-view. And they only do 12, 13, 14 a year. Enough that they could play that off as a win to their stockholders, I'm sure. Anyway, that's enough about that bollocks. Let's talk about... I'm not really going to talk about Tony versus Michael Chandler that much because, I mean, the knockout was awesome. Front kick to the face. Incredible. But Tony is washed and has been for a while. You know, he's been in a Tyron Woodley situation where he's not won 1 minute of his last 3 fights before this. And I think people are looking at this like, oh, Tony still had some in the tank, when really I'm looking at it like, it's almost exactly like Diego Sanchez versus Gilbert Melendez. Sanchez was obviously washed. Gilbert Melendez had just fought for a title or whatever. They had this fight. They got into a wild brawl. Melendez got dropped. Everyone went, oh, there's still something in Diego Sanchez. He can go toe-to-toe with one of the best guys in the world. And then as Gilbert Melendez's career continued to just go off a cliff, we realized, oh, no, it's actually that Gilbert was washed. And he fought a fight that really let Diego into it. I don't think that Michael Chandler's washed at all. I think that he just got caught at a bad moment, and people really looked into that far too much. Like, if you watch the knockdown, he gets hit on one leg. Most of that fight, Tony is far too slow to touch him. If you look how slow Tony's moving, it's ridiculous. Compared to, as I always say, the Edson Barboza fight or any of those ones from his real peak. But even compared to like the Donald Cerrone fight where he was already slowing down, is very lumbering and wooden, and he manages to catch him on one leg. And that's about what happened in that fight. You know, it wasn't that he is still quick enough to catch Chandler cold or whatever. It was just that Chandler kicked and was punched in the face at the same time. Then you saw Michael Chandler do what Michael Chandler does when he's not being an incredibly exciting fighter. Take people down, closed guard along the fence, hold them there. So much of his Bellator career. I mean, if you watch his fights with fucking Gaethje Yamauchi, who's not great, or Brent Primus the second time, you know, the grudge match where he won it by holding him down along the fence. Oh, man. Whatever. I don't give a shit. And then the co-main event was Carla Esparza versus Rose Namajunas. Oh my goodness. I will say this. I actually had a really good time listening to the commentary team on this one. I thought they were quite good. I thought they were pretty good through the night, actually. There were a couple of moments where Daniel Cormier, they went on a tangent about something, and then he said, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. And then they went back to the fight. I thought, that's all you need to do. That's literally all you need to do. That's desperately what they need in Bellator. They need someone to sit next to Big John and just go, hold on, John, something interesting's happened. And luckily, in this co-main event, fucking nothing happened. There was one moment in like the third round where Rose did the thing that she's really good at. She bounced in and skewered her with this big long jab, and then she went left foot back to right foot back, throw right hand. You know, she galloped back and threw the right hand at the same time, and that's her best shot. I fucking love that. And it landed, but that was the only thing she did all fight, except attempt a takedown in the last round. Carla Esparza attempted several takedowns. There are people arguing about the judging of this fight. I cannot imagine how little else is going on. You would have to do that. Like, find something else to care about for the week. Like, you don't need to argue about this decision. No one is screaming robbery. No one is screaming should have been a draw. I mean, could have been a draw. Should have been a draw just because it should be like, nobody wins the belt. The belt's been retired. I wanted Dana to stand outside the octagon and just throw the belt in like Naito when he was Intercontinental Champion in New Japan. He used to walk down the ramp with like the belt dragging on the floor behind him, and then he'd just hoof it into the ring. Actually, in fairness to Dana, I was watching the post-fight stuff because obviously that was half the joy of this. watching Rose Namajunas be completely convinced she dominated that fight. And then, or maybe she just bought to be the champ, you've got to beat the champ bollocks. And you go like, well, if I don't let anything happen, they can't take the belt from me. But, her reaction to this was hilarious. But I also was looking at Dana in the background, and Carla Esparza looks over at him like super excited. And he does actually smile at her and give her like a nod, which I thought was nice, because he could have been like fuming and just going, what the fuck was this? We put this on to compete with Canelo versus Bivol, and it set women's MMA back 10 years. That's the best part about this. I think Rose Namajunas is awesome. I think she's one of the best technical women's fighters that's ever lived. But because the thing that the women's MMA fans always say when you bring up how shit a lot of women's MMA is like, it's only been around for a while, it'll get better. And you're going, well, women's bantamweight has been around the longest, and in the UFC the longest, and had the money the longest, and it's still trash. But to those people I say, the first champion just became the champion again, without learning any new skills or doing anything different. We're literally right back where we started. Joanna Jędrzejczyk could win the belt tomorrow. It's like Juliana Pena winning the belt. Like, the restraint the UFC have shown by not putting Holly Holm straight into that title fight, or even convincing Rousey to come back. Either of those could beat her. It's so funny. But let's talk about other good stuff on that card, because there were a few other things. I mean, that fight between Kleydson Rodriguez and CJ Vergara, people told me to look out for Rodriguez. I did. I was impressed, but I was actually really impressed by Vergara, because he Homer Simpsoned it through the first round. He had Rodriguez backing up the whole time, but Rodriguez was just hammering him with front kicks to the body, low kicks, gliding off around the cage. And then by the second round, Vergara is actually putting in some good shots of his own. Goes southpaw, lands a body kick to the liver, I'm calling him a brew because of Kleydson a brew. Rodriguez goes in for a takedown, a panic shot because he's hurt. And maybe it's not fair to call these panic shots because it's the smart thing to do, but goes for the shot because he's hurt. Vergara stuffs the head, steps over into mount. That was all gorgeous, because people afterwards were going, it was only because of the cage grabs that he won that fight, but no cage grab was involved there. It was fucking awesome, that step over. But then in the third round, Kleydson the Brew attacks a calf slicer. That was hilarious. There were a couple of good calf slicers on this card. The calf slicer is really interesting because it pairs with, it was always an interesting technique, and guys like Buchecha and the Mendez brothers were using it in no-gi grappling, particularly no-gi too, because they had these styles that were very gi heavy, and then they had to adapt to no-gi. So you go for the calf slicer and you make the opponent to give their back, basically, or show their back. And that is sort of built into what is now the Matrix game in the gi, which is like you have a butterfly hook instead of a calf slicer proper. You have a butterfly hook on the back of their leg and you grab their belt. And the backside 50-50, which is where you just stomp down with the back of your knee on the back of their knee. So both slightly different positions to the calf slicer, but the same entries and the same sort of effects. It's just been refined a bit. But the calf slicer, like, you very rarely see guys get caught in it where you're the guy's on his back basically, but with the calf slicer in. And that one, there was a cage grab to get out of that. Keith Peterson. Was it Keith Peterson? Because he was a bit weird all night. Like, there was nothing happening in Rose versus Carla, and then Carla runs in. It must have been like the third round. Runs in to try and grab a hold of her, and Rose just jabs her in the eyes with her splayed fingers, and Keith Peterson's just sort of staring off into space. But yeah, no punishment for the fence grab in this one. Bit of a pain. Vergara wins the split decision. Honestly, it was a good back and forth fight, but a lot of people felt like Rodriguez should have won. Sort of derails his hype train, which was, people were very hyped for him. But man, flyweight, always good. What else was good? Lupita Godinez, she was good against Ariana Carnelosi. Someone called her Lupi Nurmagomedov. But just mauled this lass. And whenever Carnelosi got to the turtle, you can tell when someone does a lot of BJJ or a lot of like ground-focused grappling, because they don't, like, when people go to the turtle, if you grab their ankle, that's standard in wrestling. That's like, stay there a fucking second. But in jiu-jitsu, guys don't strip the grip. They'll just stay there with you holding their ankle. And there were long periods of this one where she got to the turtle and then Godinez is just like holding her ankle up and hitting her in the head. So I was like, where the fuck did this Lupita Godinez come from? She looks amazing. Have we got another Tatiana Suarez on our hands here? And then I looked and she was Jessica Pene's comeback fight. That one where Jessica Penne boxed someone up, which is always unusual, but then Every time they got to the fence, Jessica Penne just kept threatening to jump a triangle, and Godinez didn't do anything, or wouldn't do anything. That is something I do love about Jessica Penne, her love of like jumping triangles. Journey Newsom, people were raving about. Yeah, it was fun. His boxing's very messy. A little bit of that sort of like point fighting, out of range, American kickboxing, side kicks, wheel kick stuff, but bursts in with a 1-2 and then is there to be hit afterwards, or really lunges with his right hand. But decent. Oh, sorry, yes, let's talk about the one that really did get me hype, and I wrote a lot about this in my post-fight article, Francisco Trinaldo. Because if you watch the Trinaldo Filthy Casuals guide, which has since been taken down, not by the UFC, but by Timberland, because I had Try Again in the background, which, you know, I'm not going to apologise, that song slaps. But Trinaldo, we talked about his strengths and his weaknesses, and I said his weaknesses are there's too many fucking southpaws at lightweight or in MMA generally, and he's met too many of them. Because when he's southpaw, he throws this big overhand left. When he's against orthodox fighters, all that's protecting them is their right hand. The moment that they throw their right hand, they're in danger. The moment they're recovering from throwing their right hand, they're in danger. With a southpaw, even guys like Chiesa, you know, back in 2014, Chiesa didn't know anything about striking. But when you get hit with a big overhand shot, your reaction is to turn towards your back leg. You know, think about any time that you've been hit or like had something thrown at you. You turn towards your back leg. You crouch down into your stance, as opposed to like out of your stance where like you're leaning off to your left, which just wouldn't happen, you know, if you're an orthodox fighter. So your normal reaction, your instinctual reaction, will take you away from the overhand and put you down behind your lead shoulder. So Trinaldo's career is full of winging these overhands at southpaws and them just sort of like rolling them off accidentally or through fear or through instinct. And against orthodox fighters, he's beaten much better strikers. He's beaten Ross Pearson on the feet. He beat Chad Laprise. He's beaten Jai Herbert, you know, very slick strikers. And then he has no weapons from his right side as well. But then in this one, he lands a jab in the first round, and I went, hold up, what? Because most of Trinaldo's career is the jab is something that he puts out in the space between the two of you, never coming close to you, and you know he's going to do that twice and then he's going to throw the overhand. He has seldom ever tried to jab someone. He has jabbed in the area of someone so that they think that something else is happening, but they know the overhand's coming. But in this one, lanced him with a jab in round one, and I went, hold up. And then I think it was later in round one, but he got in a couple of exchanges. Roberts basically rolled off this big overhand left every time it came. And then as Roberts steps in a third time, Trinaldo jabs him and shakes him to his boots. Like, Roberts does one of the most exaggerated chicken dances I've seen since Zab Judah. Got my Zab reference in. And then, of course, Trinaldo goes back to winging the left hand over the top. And then one of the other things everything we talked about on the fucking Filthy Casuals guide came up here, because then he has him hurt and he starts trying to guillotine him. And then he hurts him again and he grabs his head and then goes down and starts grabbing his leg. It's like he's trying to fucking cradle him. And I'm going, what? You've never been a wrestler. There's no excuse for you trying to fucking cradle him. But yes, like looking for guillotines and stuff. He didn't jump the guillotine properly like he did against James Vick and Chiesa, where he's a 3-round fighter. He wins 1.5 rounds and gets a 29-28 decision. Why are you jumping a guillotine and losing the round? But then in the third round, he went back to the jab a couple of times, and I was going, damn, wish this fight happened sooner. Because if this had happened 8 years ago, maybe Trinaldo would actually start trying to jab people. Also, interesting comparison with Rob Font's wide right we were talking about last week. Rob Font, orthodox fighter, throws a lot of wide right hands to the body. Landed about 100 on Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera didn't seem phased. And we were talking about how, like, the left hook to the liver, or the left hook to the body, has the big advantage of often hitting the liver, because the liver hangs down on the right side of your body, without, you know, pretending that I have an anatomy degree or anything like that. But if you get hit on that side, you do feel the difference. Trinaldo, throwing his wide left to the body because he's a southpaw, basically every time he lands, he folds Roberts in half. Just a great performance out of the old boy. He didn't look gassed in the third round. He kept going the entire time. You know, obviously he's not making the huge weight cut anymore, which is nice. So that probably is going to affect his gas tank in a positive way. And he fought exactly, I mean, I said this last week, but this is exactly the kind of fighter he should have looked bad against, because he hates fighting southpaws. Like, he's so bad at it. Yeah. Really good for me as the biggest Trinaldo fan on earth. Randy Brown and Chaos Williams was good fun. Chaos Williams hurt him in the first round, and then Randy Brown came out for the second round and went, oh, hold up, I'm a long boy. And decided to actually use his length and his lank. And suddenly was like unhittable. And it was really impressive. Hua versus Ovinson Brute, I don't even remember. Oh, Fialho versus Cameron Van Camp was good fun because, again, another picture-perfect counter-left hook. I said they're going to start knocking everyone out soon. His counter-punching is really nice. He backs people up and then he stays on the end of their reach and lets them lunge at him off the fence, which is a really good way of counter-punching, offensive counter-punching. But Van Camp here, he's carrying his right hand at his chest and he's throwing his right hand. And at no point does it come even close to being a guard. And then he got knocked out on just the worst punch to throw at someone with a good counter left hook, the right uppercut. Go watch Ray Mercer versus... who did he hit with that? Actually, Ray Mercer's got a few. But dude's trying to right uppercut Ray Mercer and just getting left hooked in the head. The window where you can get hit on the right side of your head is the longest when you have to drop your hand before you even initiate the punch. But yeah, dope knockout. And then Brandon Royval versus Matt Schnell was hilarious because Brandon Royval managed to get himself knocked down by a guy who's not really a striker. Because he's Brandon Royval, he'll always get knocked down. But then on the ground, basically a lot of the current jiu-jitsu meta. He started attacking on the ground, as in like when Matt Schnell was postured down on him. Matt Schnell had his hands on the mat, which is cardinal sin of jiu-jitsu, or being in guard, rather. Brandon Royval goes for an omoplata in the way that makes anyone who's ever hurt their knee cringe, because I have seen knees get blown out by dudes doing that, pull your leg up and trying to thread it through. You know, I don't want to say a rubber guard, because the rubber guard is like a whole system, and anytime you say rubber guard hurts people's knees, they'll go, you're supposed to bring your knee up to you, not pull your foot up past your knee. But dudes be doing this with omoplatas all the time, and you can really hurt yourself doing it. One of the Gracie girls blew out their knee doing this. But it does work until it doesn't. And it'll work and blow your knee out and still work. But it gets the omoplata on Schnell. Schnell postures up, and as he postures up, Royval attacks the legs, which is the current meta in jiu-jitsu. Guys are trying to stay low because of the leg attacks. You attack the upper body as they stand to posture out of things or to take away the opportunity to do them. You attack the legs. So omoplata goes onto the leg with the calf slicer, uses it to sweep, gets on top, attacks the guillotine, and the guillotine was, as we talked about before, that double enclosure guillotine, the Gordon Ryan guillotine. And if you watched it, he managed to finish him with one hand because he was bringing his other hand in to get the power guillotine to assist, but Schnell was already tapping. You can be choking people with one hand. It's just you have to really get that, what Danaher calls double enclosure, which is basically the point of your elbow or the crook of your elbow underneath their windpipe, as opposed to your wrist going up into their windpipe. You are wrapping their neck. So I think that was about it for good fights. I have to shout out PFL because while they did have a card with like half a dozen women's lightweight fights on, which is just the worst card building I've ever seen, they did have a great fight between Ray Cooper III and Carlos Leal with some amazing clinch striking. And I know that doesn't sound amazing, but this guy fucking mauled him with knees to the body. You know, clinch striking is one of those things where you go, is it interesting? You know, when you see two people holding a collar tie and like hammering little tiny punches at each other. But when you see someone do it well, like Matt Brown or just Matt Brown, it really do be one of the prettiest things in MMA. Anyway, that'll do us for today. I wrote a big article. Go check it out. Become a boy. Read the article at thefightprimer.com. Sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And I've already said, but fightprimer.com is where all my written shit is. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Kayla Harrison losing the PFL tournament on points because she wants to get rounds in, and you get more points for finishing opponents. Bless.